One of the key strengths of the Adeptia suite is to allow business users to interface with data as part of a workflow. And in this example, we will show how to present data in a web form for users to review, correct, and resubmit data as part of a process. So here's an example where we will take a raw data file that contains investment data records, as we can see here on the top left corner. And as part of our mapping rules, one of the rules is to check for data record that has an amount greater than $60,000. And if that amount is greater than the threshold amount, so if there are records that have the amount greater than $60,000, then we will route those records as erroneous data to a workflow task where users would then see that data in a web form, as we are showing at the bottom part of the screen, and users would then be able to review, correct, and resubmit data as part of this workflow task. As workflow tasks are being assigned to the users, they will get an email notification which will notify them that there is a task pending, and users will then click on the login link in the email and they will be taken to this login page, and then they can log in with their user account. And as part of the home page, there is a link to the task manager. And once you click on the task manager, any correction task that is assigned to this user or to this role will be shown here as part of the task manager. As we can see, there's a correction task assigned with the subject of investment data review and correction, and the status is new, and the priority is immediate, and this is the due date of this particular task. And then business users can click on action and click on open task to see the actual data that has been filtered out as part of the process flow. And here's your workflow task where users can look at those filtered records or exceptions, and then they can make any changes to this data as part of their review and correction process. And once they have made the corrections to the process, they can click on Finish Task and route the data back into the process flow, which I'm going to show you as part of this demo. One of the other key things that users can do here in this particular page is they have a link to task history. And one of the key reasons for the task history is not only users can look at previous tasks that they have completed or they have worked on, as well as their status, but also they can look at the current tasks that are pending in their queue, and they can actually drill down further into that task from a business level information. And in this task, they can see that this is the owner of the task and this is the status, as we also saw in the task manager page. But also you can click on the execution view, and the execution view will show you from a graphical perspective where this particular workflow is. So here, these check marks that you see on these boxes are the activities that have been completed successfully. So here we got the actual raw data file, then we parsed that data file and then routed it to a data mapping step. And this is the mapping step that identified erroneous records. And then once those erroneous records were identified, those records were then routed to a workflow task, and you will notice that this task is now pending as its blinking state. Once the workflow task is completed, in other words, once the users review the task and make corrections and finish the task, then the next step would be to send that corrected data back into the process flow, which this last step is going to do. So this is your runtime monitoring as well as interfacing with data as part of the process flow as it gets executed depending upon the number of files being processed at a given time. Now let me show you how this process is built. So here is a pre-built form that I created earlier, and I gave a name as enrollment data correction, and I selected which form as part of the option here, and I clicked on create form button. So I pulled in different components from the palette area into this screen and defined each of these fields as account number, customer name, amount, approver, bank name, and these are the same fields that are coming in from the raw data file. And one of the other things that I also did is we use the repeat function here, which is one of the components here in the palette, And in the repeat function, you can specify how many of these records you can expect in a form at runtime. So once you create a form using the form designer, using the click and drag component of this particular section here, uh, you can very easily build these forms, rearrange the fields depending upon your preference, and then save the form. Now, once the form is saved, we can then pull the form XML into the mapping. So the first thing is you create a form. Secondly, you use a schema to create the XML of this particular form. So what I'm doing is I'm going to services, clicked on XML schema, and I created this activity called investment correction form XML. And I selected the web form option here, and I chose that web form that I created as the previous step. So the idea is that in mapping, I can use this XML rendition of this form and then map any data to this form, and then at runtime, this form will be shown as part of the web form interface that we saw earlier. So here is your XML. So the first thing is you create the web form, then you come over to the schema category and build a web form schema that I'm doing here. And this is an XML schema type. The other activity that we also would need to create is the schema for the actual text data file that we are pulling in from a folder. So we need to also create the schema of that particular activity. So we went to services, selected text schema, and then here is the schema of the raw data file that I'm pulling in. So here's the raw data file with these fields in it. And this is a tab delimited file, so I selected tab delimited here. This is a new line character record separation, and these are the fields that are part of that raw data file. So this is the other activity that you need to build as part of the prerequisites before we go into the mapping. And then this is the mapping step. So here, once you have the schemas created, go into the data transformation, click on data mapping. And you will notice there is a data map that I created as part of this particular process flow. And let me just open up this map here. So this particular map allows us to get data from the source file, which is the schema that you see here on the left-hand side representing the text file, and the form, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. So this is your form fields that we are mapping from the raw data file. So it's basically a one-to-one map. But one of the key rules that I have placed here is the rule that goes into this record node. And in this record node, I'm applying a rule where I only want to send data to this form XML schema on the right hand side if the amount is greater than $60,000. So you can apply any type of rule in the map. There's a lot of other functions like math functions, string, date functions, aggregation, conditional lookups, etc. And we also support access functions for more complex mapping scenarios. The final thing is to tie all of these activities together in a process. And this is what we will do next. So we'll create a process. We'll click on Create New. And let's give this a new name. So this is your investment data filter process. And this will route data to workflow tasks. And then click on Process Designer. So once this Process Designer is opened up, we will go to the activities and we will go to Source. We'll pull in the source. And this is the activity that we will create by going into the Develop Services and then Source and then File. And this is the activity where I have defined where to go and pick up the file. So this is the activity that I have just placed into this canvas area from the source file category. Then the next thing that we will do is we will read the file. So this is going to be our schema, text, and investment data schema that we defined earlier, which is the tab delimited flat file structure. The next thing that we will do is we will go into the data transform and select our data map. which is to apply that $60,000 amount rule. And if that amount is greater than the $60,000, then we will route the data to this workflow task. And then the next thing that we would do is we'll go to Schema and select our web form XML schema, which we will drop it in here. So once we filter out the data, we will structure the data into that form XML so that we can render it in a web form screen. And then the next thing that we are going to do is going into the workflow task and selecting that assign correction task and presenting it as part of the workflow task to the user. So this workflow task is actually created by going into the application screen and then under services and then under workflow, I created a workflow task and I assigned it to myself. And in this particular case, you can also assign it to any user or any role for that matter. And then here is where I selected the form that we created earlier. So the data that the mapping produces as part of the filtration based on that rule will be converted into a web form, XML, and then that web form will be, and this is where that workflow task goes. And then the final thing that we will be doing is to place that output. Once the correction is done, we need to create that output into a file and drop it into a folder. So this could be any target that we can build. It could be a database, it could be anything else for that matter. We will simply connect all of these activities. And once the process is completed, we can then use this process flow, save it, and then go to events, and we can bind this process to an event. So here we can bind this to an event trigger where we can look for that file to arrive every 10 minutes or 10 seconds depending upon your polling frequency, and you can refer to the help guide in terms of how to bind or attach an event to a process. So once the process is attached to an event, you can view the process execution by going to monitor and then going to dashboard and then going to the process flow. So here, for example, you can also manually execute a process. So you can see how many processes are running. There's one running and there are two executed, as you can see here. And you can go into different details of this process by clicking on the link of any of these instances that have been completed or still running. And you can look at the actual details of the process execution in terms of each step, how much time it took, were there any error records, how much data was processed. So if you require an extensive demo of the workflow capability of the Adeptia suite, please feel free to contact us at sales@adeptia.com. This concludes the demo. Thank you and goodbye.